Here is Bello, who begins with the Secretary General of the United Nations, who seemed very concerned. But let me ask you, Bello, as an analyst and, if you like, a pro-Eastern analyst, the international media was widely reporting towards the beginning of this week that Russia was withdrawing from areas that they had taken beyond Donetsk and towards Kiev. Russia was withdrawing from those areas. Was that correct information, or should we understand that as Western propaganda?
No, there was an element of truth in it. Because there was this Ukrainian counter-offensive that was launched, and it equally put Russia under enormous pressure. So they had to withdraw to certain places closer to Donetsk and Luhansk so that they could consolidate their grounds and marshal their forces they can. But then one thing that we should know is that some have termed it to be a Russian defeat. It's a far-fetched from the reality. But then to also say that Russia is having it its own way, we call it be deceptive. They're under pressure at the moment. But then, if you remember the Operation Barbarossa, when the Nazis launched the invasion of Soviet Union, the Russians proved their tenacity because the Nazis were about, I think, 5 kilometers or so closer to Moscow. But by taking a U-turn to Kiev, they gave Russia the room to mount a counterattack. So the Russians have shown that they have the tenacity. But
Barbarossa was Russia being attacked.
Yeah, and that was during the World War II.
This one here, Russia is the aggressor.
What it means now, Ukraine is mounting a counterattack.
It still will be considered within military terms as a defense. What Ukraine is mounting is a defense.
You see, at the moment,
they are defending their positions.
They are holding their grounds at the moment, trying to consolidate their troops. Because
they're trying to regain lost grounds.
Yeah. No, they are trying as much as they can to host the grounds they actually captured in the initial offensive. No, at the initial stage, they were at the periphery of Kiev, but they had to withdraw.
This from the Russian perspective. You're speaking from the Russian angle.
Perspective.
Yeah.
And then, so they focus around the regions of Kharkiv. I think the map here, we'll soon come to this. So now, initially they were somewhere around here. They were around these regions.
The Russians?
Yeah, they were around.
They went all the way?
Yeah. You should remember there was this famous massacre alleged at Bucha.
Okay.
That became a, headline.
Yeah.
But then they had to withdraw because of certain setbacks they encountered. And then one of it is the presence of Western weapons really changed the balance of power.
That's what I was going to ask you, that what is changing the balance of power? Is certainly weapons, not personnel? We're sure it's not personnel?
It's about weapons. And then Russians...
It's not personnel. So we cannot accuse America of sending troops to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian side of the war. Yeah. Can we accuse America of doing that?
No.
Because they haven't sent troops.
We cannot accuse them directly. But then we've seen instances where, in terms of conflict, there could be law that forbids citizens from going to certain countries. There will be no law to prevent people from going to Ukraine. So indirectly, they are aiding people to go to Ukraine. Because
America is aiding people?
Indirectly.
Civilians?
Yeah, they are encouraging civilians, ex-military men.
Yes, but there's been no official document that is releasing from the Pentagon.
That's what I'm saying, that officially...
A battalion or a brigade to go and fight in Ukraine. Similar to what we saw in, say, Gulf War I.
Yeah.
That has not happened.
But that has not happened.
So if the American personnel on the ground, we don't know.
No, they are not American personnel on the ground.
But there's equipment for sure.
But then in terms of training and support, we have some training that is taking place, not in Ukraine itself, but then in neighboring countries like Poland and the rest.
Training?
Yeah, of Ukrainian personnel. And
of people to go and fight war?
The Ukrainian soldiers who are being trained. You know, Ukraine was...
Being prepared for the war.
You know, Ukraine was used to put in Eastern Bloc weapons. You know, they're part of Soviet Union. Now you're giving them Western supply arms. You need to retrain. You need to train them on how to use those weapons. So they are involved in training and other support. But in terms of combatants on the ground, there are no Western boots on the ground. But then, Russia equally has, it's under pressure now because initially the counter-offensive resulted in Ukraine recapturing the entire origin here.
Yeah, you can leave it there so viewers can see. Okay, so this town, Severodonetsk, is in Russia.
No. These are Ukrainian territories.
Okay, so this is the border over here.
Yeah.
That's the border.
Yeah.
So anything red is Ukraine.
The entirety of this place is Ukraine. But this is Crimea. It was annexed in 2014.
Out of Ukraine?
Out of Ukraine.
Or out of Soviet Union?
No, out of Ukraine.
For Russia?
For Russia.
So Crimea is a province of Russia?
It's
a colony of Russia? What is it?
It's now officially part of Ukraine. But it has been under Russia's annexation since 2014. when the conflict first erupted. You know, the coup that over and the protest, Euromaidan, that overthrew what they call Viktor Yanukovych. To the Russians, that was a coup d'etat. To the Western, what do you call it? Western leaders, that was what do you call it?
Expressions of democracy.
Democracy. So there was this conflict about.
And that's what brought the new Ukrainian president to power.
No, he came after Petro Poroshenko.
Okay, all right.
But then.
So who flies the flag in Crimea? Do they fly the Russian flag or do they fly the Ukrainian flag?
So at the moment, Crimea is under Russian control annexation since 2014.
All right.
And then by these current places are places that Russia captured recently when they started the war.
Okay.
But Crimea has been under Russian control since 2014.
Okay.
But the Ukrainian counter-offensive have been able to liberate Kharkiv and then some part of Kherson.
Okay, so Donetsk and Luhansk are those who are having a referendum this weekend?
The entirety of this place. So now this is the entirety of this place.
The referendum is taking place everywhere?
It's taking place in now Luhansk, Donetsk. Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
Four?
Four.
Oh,
but even within this place, not the entirety of this territory, it's within Russia control at the moment. And that is what you see here. Even some part of Kherson, the portion with the blue are places that Ukraine has been able to reclaim.
So the places in the blue are not taking part in the referendum?
They are part of the region, but because but those places have been captured by Ukraine, so those places wouldn't be part of the referendum.
So it's really a plebiscite they are doing, I think. It's really
well,
a plebiscite.
The entirety of the whole thing is illegal if we go by international law. Because
who is asking for the referendum, by the way?
From the Russian perspective, you know, having recognized the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, so they believe it is part of the...
Russia has already recognized them as a republic.
As an independent state. And that was why when he was going to invade the Ukraine, he said he was going to protect the, what do you call it, these republics, Luhansk and Donetsk. That was the pretext that was used for the war. But then rather than limiting the war to this portion, they saw Russian offensive down to Kiev. Yeah. So I mean, that was just a pretext for their bigger objective of usurping the Ukrainian government. So now, officially, it is part of Ukraine. What's happening is that it is the rebels who were controlling the Russian allies, who are in control of Luhansk, Donetsk, and other regions here, that are calling for the referendum.
That's interesting. So what officially is Ukrainian law that governs these countries, isn't it? And they are part of Ukraine.
Officially,
Luhansk,
they are part
Donetsk,
of Ukraine. So
Zaporizhia, and Kherson. They are all part of Ukraine.
Yeah, and they should be under Ukrainian laws.
They are threatening to hold a referendum this weekend to determine whether they want to be part of Russia or part of Ukraine.
So de jure, they are part of Ukraine. De facto, they are under Russian control at the moment.
Yes, I get it.
So now they are organizing the referendum, which will start on Friday.
But then that will be a de facto referendum.
Yeah, that's a de facto referendum.
So it doesn't have the backing of international law.
Yeah, it doesn't have the backing of international law. But from the Russian perspective, nobody is neutral at the moment because they believe the West is involved. So it's not about. So the argument from the West is not.
It's not about neutral. It's about being on the side of the law, isn't it?
Well.
So, for instance, America was not able to declare a no-fly zone because they wanted to keep with the tenets of being able to do that, going through the United Nations Security Council. Russia was going to veto that. So you don't have the legal backing to go into a no-fly zone. So they didn't.
Well, that is America seeking a moral ground. But in reality, America doesn't respect international law either.
No, I'm not talking about America respecting international law. I'm just saying that in terms of going in to hold a referendum, it's not about tit for tat. It is that it has to be done in a certain way that gives it the backing of international law. As at now, if the referendum occurs, it doesn't have the backing of international law. Yes, America went to Panama without international law. That's okay. But I'm just saying that...
Everywhere they go without international law.
No, that's irrelevant to the conversation right now. That whatever happens there is without the backing of international law. Is that not so?
Of course, but I'm saying
and
that...
so what could be the ramifications of that?
Well, it still shows that the war is still ongoing. And then whilst Russia is under pressure, they've equally upped the ante. Because there have been this partial mobilization that have been called, and that brings additional 3,000 troops
to these territories.
To this territory. So what we can't tell for now is.
So who's going to supervise the referendum? Russian Electoral Commission?
Well, I think it will be carried out by the pseudo-independent republics.
Okay.
Of Luhansk, Donetsk.
So, given the circumstances, we should not be surprised if the outcome of the referendum comes and says they had voted more than 90% to join Russia, isn't it?
Yeah, we shouldn't be, because something similar happened in Crimea.
Yeah.
And the result was foretold before it even started.
If that were to happen, will Russians go in to consolidate
Yeah, the whole idea of the referendum itself is to consolidate where they have now.
Okay.
And then I think what they are trying to do is, having recognized that they are far away from the objective of getting to Kiev, what they are trying to do is now hold around this portion, hoping that winter will descend. And then, you know, the issue of the oil price and the, what do you call it?
Will boost the economy?
Not just boost the economy, but that will create a problem with the West, that people will be calling for peaceful resolution.
Because people will be feeling the pinch in winter without the Russian gas.
And there will be pressure on the Western countries to call for resolution of the war.
For the purpose of the economy, the gas.
Yeah. And then that could give Russia the upper hand in any possible negotiation. Or that could also be used that when the winter sets in and the two sides cannot embark on further offensive, they could use that time to replenish their depleted forces, reorganize better, and still mount further attack. So at the moment, I don't think...
So there's a lot of geography involved in the analysis, isn't it? Winter is key.
Yeah.
The arrival of the European winter
and then
will shoot up demand for gas and heating. And Russia is strong in that area. They've already cut Germany off gas. They've cut everyone. And you are thinking that people will have to come and negotiate with Russia for that gas. Yeah,
there will be pressure on the European allies to either find an alternative or go back to Russia and negotiate.
It's difficult to find an alternative in Europe at this time?
Yeah.
I see.
And then another thing is that there's also been this possibility of a nuclear escalation.
Russia have indicated that they will not stop at
using
nuclear weapons.
I initially said that the war is already a Russo-NATO war from the onset, but then there have been clear admission now, because one of the weapons that really changed the face of the war was this.
What weapon is this?
HIMARS, High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. You see, initially the Ukrainians lacked the capacity to launch attack or fire rocket into the Russian occupied zones.
Okay.
But now with this, they were able to launch attack behind Russian lines, and that allowed them to hit what they call Russian arms depot.
Oh, I see. And they launched this attack from as far as where? Kiev?
No, like into the Russian occupied territory around Kherson, the occupied zone.
They launched it from where?
Around the front lines.
I see.
So by being able to, what do you call it, destroy...
And it's a smart missile, so it can be targeted?
Yeah. So it's a, what do you call it, it's a US provided system. So with this on the field, it changed the face of the war because it placed Russians on the defensive because their depots were being struck.
Oh, I see. So the depots that were the supply bases for the front lines were struck with a missile that goes over the front line and hits the depot.
So at a safe distance for the Ukrainian troops, you just hit the depot. And
you fire beyond the front line?
Yeah, beyond the front line.
And just hit the depot?
Yeah. So
you are destroying their supplies?
And
so food is finished, water is finished?
Yeah. And so that was what led to the Russian withdrawal, because they're trying to withdraw to pull back all the forces, all the weapons beyond the reach of this weapon. But then to counter this weapon, the Russians equally fell back on one of their allies, Iran.
Okay.
And we also have a drone war. You know, the Ukrainians were using this drone successively. The famous Bayraktar drone from Turkey, TV2. But then the Russians fell back on this Iranian drone. It flies below the reach of US radar.
Below?
Yeah, below the reach.
So the radar doesn't pick it up?
Doesn't pick it up. That equally allowed the Russians to, what do you call it, target Ukrainian artilleries. And that is what has also been used by the Russians to stabilize the front now, that whilst Ukraine is on the offensive and they are on the back foot, they've been able to slow the fall of the territories they are holding.
I get it.
And then there's this potential of we having, what do you call it? And then at the United Nations, some of the remarks of Biden.
What did he say?
He accused Russia of shamelessly invading Ukraine. And he said, if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for. So it's
referring to the United Nations.
United Nations General Assembly. And then the Russians' response, which you could see that now it's about not just Ukrainian being seen as the worst, now it's seen that Ukraine is the battlefield between Russia and the West.
What did he say?
In the event of a threat to the territorial integrity of our country and to defend Russia and our people, we will certainly make use of all weapon systems available to us. He further said, this is not a bluff, and those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that the weather vane can turn and point towards them. This is one of the clearest indications about Russia using
nuclear. Russia has indicated, yes.
But then that also takes us back to NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and those nuclear armed states. And you could see that these are the distribution of what you call nuclear arms.
Interpret this for us. What does it mean?
These are the countries that are legally allowed
to use nuclear.
Yeah.
That includes Russia.
No, these are countries that are acknowledged to have nuclear weapons.
Have nuclear, possess.
Yeah. But then Those ones that are allowed to legally possess nuclear weapons are the ones here. These 5.
5, count them.
These 7, I think. Russia, US, China, what do you call it? France,
UK,
Britain,
Pakistan.
Yeah. So these ones are on the UN Security Council, the permanent veto.
Yeah, these are the permanent, yes.
And then these ones are the non-Security Council members. And
non-permanent.
No, they are not. They are not permanent members.
Yeah.
But you see, NPT was born out of the proliferation of these 2 countries. India and Pakistan have always been enemies. So when India tested the nuclear weapons, and then Pakistan also responded in kind, then there was this need to halt the spread of nuclear weapon and its potential.
So when you fry 5,900, that's how much nuclear weapons Russia
nuclear
have?
warhead.
So Russia have more than the United States?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then China equally has the next highest, followed by France. And then Israel is believed to have de facto. It has this ambiguity, policy of ambiguity, that it does not admit to have nuclear weapon, nor deny it has nuclear weapon.
Okay.
That's the position of Israel on that.
North Korea has, and South Africa has 0. And why are they here?
They used to have nuclear weapon, about 9. The apartheid regime developed 9 nuclear weapons, had the program running. But then with the collapse of apartheid, they voluntarily dismantled their nuclear weapon and signed the non-proliferation treaty. But then you could equally see the deceptiveness, the double standards in this context here now. What North Korea has been sanctioned for having nukes, right? But Israel is left off the hook for having the same nukes.
Okay.
Iran is being battered for trying to purportedly develop a nuclear weapon. So you could see that international, what do you call it?
Well, the point that they may be making international is that Israel is consistently under siege by Hezbollah and Hamas and occupied territory. So Israel needs to protect itself. Whereas North Korea is not under siege.
It's under siege.
By who?
33,000 troops on the South Korean side.
No, those troops are in defense of South Korea. They are not aggressors to North Korea.
What is defense to one party?
Because the South Koreans have showed aggression.
What party?
And occasionally they threaten aggression against the South.
See,
so America has put the troops there as a buffer so that they cannot threaten aggression against the South.
What party A defines as defense?
Yeah.
Is what party B defines as threat. And what party
No, they can't, because it's verifiable. If you are the aggressor, you cannot say that you are in defense of it.
And in that case,
North Korea is the
America
aggressor.
had no qualms in the Cuban missile crisis, because Cuba was also defending itself by bringing the Soviet missiles in its territory.
Yes, Cuba was defending itself, but America fought an ideological war against Cuba. It's ideological.
No, but if you are going by strictly on the example here, that Israel's own is for defensive purposes, the North Korea is equally for its own regime survival. But mind you, South Africa was going for that weapon was because it felt threatened, the only island.
Yes, correct. So Israel is finding itself in that situation because it is threatened by those who have occupied the territory.
Occupy what?
The territory.
These people were brought in 1936.
Yes, but they fought a war to gain the territory.
Ethnically clean some people.
No, they fought a war. Was it a war? Was it a war that gave Israel the Golan Heights and
not that.
That gave them, was it a war?
The European Jews themselves, Zionism, was born in Eastern Europe. The Jews have been in Europe for almost a millennium. They were never integrated into European society. They were seen as second class.
Yeah, but that's nothing.
So
that means nothing.
A xenophobic conception, let's export them. They were packed and dumped in Palestine.
Yes.
In 1936.
Yes. On occupied land, weren't they?
Occupied land.
They were dumped on an unoccupied land.
Occupied lands.
No, there was nobody there.
People were there.
What did they do to the people?
Ethnically wipe them off.
Oh, that's not true.
Oh, you can go and check.
But it's in the UN report. They were given a place to be.
Then why is the UN calling for
and then the states around them decided to oust them. That's what happened in 1969.
Don't forget that the whole Holy Land were under Ottoman jurisdiction. When the Ottomans were defeated in the World War II, there were Arabs there. There were indigenous Arab Jews over there.
But the Arab Jews.
And these ones were brought all the way from Europe. From Poland, Britain, whatever you have it, and dumped
as Jews, yes.
And when they came, they didn't meet the land empty. One of the controversial issues today is that the Jews who came after millennium.
But the peace that Egypt made with Israel under Sadat recognizes the aggression of the Allied forces against Israel. But the peace treaty that was signed with Mubarak and all of that, Egypt and Israel, the peace treaty, that still exists. It recognized from the Egyptian angle, and Egypt was one of the biggest, apart from Jordan, that took part in the aggression.
Egypt was the first?
Yes, so Egypt recognized the aggression and made peace with Israel. They still have the peace. But Jordan hasn't made peace with Israel. Iran has not
Jordan
made
has
peace.
made peace with Israel.
Oh, Jordan has made peace with Israel. Okay, so Iran has not made peace with Israel. Iraq has not made peace with Israel. And now Israel has all of these Hezbollah and Hamas that they have to contend with. So being allowed to have nuclear weapons sort of makes sense, but that's not really an issue. So Russia do have capacity to launch nuclear weapons, don't they?
Yeah.
All right.
But the issue now is that this tells you how fluid the international system is, that each power defines what is in its interest, and they want to equate that same position to mean global. Because, for example, when US talk about global security,
but that's always part of international the history of international law.
What US terms as global, what do you call it, security, it's only simply a veiled interpretation of US hegemony, and sometimes it's hegemonic arrogance.
When we Ghana term West African instability as a threat to us, are we talking hegemony? If we still look at what's happening in Mali and Burkina Faso and we think it's a threat,
but then,
and we are sending troops to the northern part of Ghana.
If you look at what is happening, this is a war being carried by non-state actors against state actors. But in this situation, these are state actors in clash. But the question is that, okay, you see, Russia, per all the international, agreement, we seem to be in breach. But then history has shown that great powers don't respect international agreement. That is number one. Neither US nor Russia
is respected. My problem with you is Russia in breach or not? And your answer is America used to be in breach.
What I'm saying,
I don't get that.
What I said,
is Russia in breach? If they are in breach, they are in breach. Was America in breach? Yes, they were in breach. Is Russia in breach? Yes, they are in breach.
What I'm saying is,
but your answer to Russia in breach, America too were in breach.
I'm trying to make a distinction between what is on paper and what is in practice. On paper, Russia is in breach. Obviously, we can't deny that. But in reality, no side has ever respected you. So why should you hold somebody accountable and leave the other person off the hook?
No, I don't understand.
On paper, Russia has breached international agreement, right?
Yes.
It has been held on the hook.
Yes, for aggression, for violating the sanctity of territories.
But when US did the same, did anybody hold them off the hook?
US put whose territory out?
Iraq. What did they want to do for Iraq?
Weapons of mass destruction.
Have they provided?
No, they haven't. But that was a report.
Did they go with UN approval?
No, but they had a report. So but if that's illegal, you can talk about it illegal, but you can't say because of that Russia's own is not illegal. It is illegal.
But if Russia also presents us with a report, should we say the report is standing?
Russia hasn't presented any report.
Oh, they also brought.
No, they just said that Ukraine is their territory.
Their evidences. Anytime they are being accused, they bring counter evidence to the UN Security Council.
That's what.
That this and that. But the fact is that the report is not a validity on its own. What makes the decision valid in the international community is the approval by the international community.
Yes.
So now Russia is in breach of it. Obviously, we can't deny that.
But however, America was in breach.
However, the person trying to hold them to account was he calling?
Who is holding them to account? The United Nations. The Secretary General spoke.
Secretary General.
Yes.
But who is back? Is the US sending weapons or the US sending weapons?
No, you are saying America is the one trying to hold Russia to account. I'm saying it's not America, it's the Security Council, it's the United Nations. The Secretary General who spoke at the United Nations General Assembly is not America, he's the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Is an employee of nations.
Of the United Nations, yes.
Employee of nations in the United Nations. Members of the United Nations.
Yes.
So fine. He is speaking in his capacity as an employee doing his work.
Yes, as the Secretary General.
But when decision is taken by the UN through the Security Council, it is supposed to be enforced by states. And those who are not trying to enforce the decisions themselves have been held culpable of violating institutions.
The UN decisions, Security Council are not to be enforced by states. They have to be enforced by the Security Council.
Then I'm saying that if that is the situation,
yes.
Today we are trying to hold Russia to account. Fine.
Yes.
Obviously, it should be held to account.
Yeah.
But the person trying to hold them to account
it's not the person who is trying to hold them to. It's an organization of the United Nations that's trying to hold Russia to account. It's not a person.
So where was UN when US was doing his own thing?
Kofi Annan spoke against it. The Iraqi conversation you had. Kofi Annan spoke against it. In his capacity as UN Security Council General Secretary, he said that the Security Council does not support this.
Let me explain my point very well.
He said that.
What I'm saying
I don't get your point.
Kofi Annan said it as an employee of the UN, right?
He spoke as the United Nations Secretary General.
But he's an employee, a staff, the overall boss of the UN as a staff. Guterres, as he called it down his own, this is his speech. This is Guterres' speech.
Yes.
This is his speech. And this even encapsulates the entirety of the problem we have today.
Yes.
Because he said, at the time of, the world is now at the time of great peril, with the world blighted by war, which is a reference of not just the Ukrainian war, the Syrian war, the war in Libya, we could talk about climate change, which is climate chaos, climate change, which is equally causing a lot of problems. We've seen the flooding in Pakistan, which is means as a consequence of the body. We've seen the spread of the Sahara, desertification.
Yes. So he's right about
which is equally showing the divide between the developed country and the developing country, because the developed countries are emitting more gases, and the developing countries are paying more of the consequences. There's this disagreement who should pay for the reversion.
There's a principle in law called polluter pays, so they are working on that.
And then scared by hate, shame, and all this anger, poverty, he is doing his work as a staff. But whatever UN decide to do is supposed to be enforced by states.
No, I don't understand.
Whatever UN decide is supposed to be enforced by states. And one of the institutions that's supposed to enforce that decision is the UN Security Council, which is the most powerful organ.
Yes.
But within the Security Council, those who are not trying to check Russia themselves have not shown respect for the same law they are trying to hold Russia to account. So once we will blame Russia for a decision today, we will always remind the world that when it was their turn, they also didn't.
But the Security Council has been designed to operate like that. Don't you get it? That's why there's veto.
And now this war is now showing the what do you call it, the short-sightedness of the people. You know, it was in haste. If you look at
this, was a short-sightedness of who?
The founders of the UN, the architect of the UN Security Council.
The architecture that I'm talking about, which is the use of the veto power at the Security Council. The UN is designed like that. But if you look UN Security Council is not designed to be democratic. It's designed to give power to those who ended the Second World War.
Fine.
Yes. And so those people have the veto. So the expression of the veto cannot be described as immoral.
So it goes back from the onset.
Cannot be immoral.
So it shows you that from the onset, UN was an architect of hegemony.
Now you can say that in 2022, but that was set up in 1945.
And it eliminated.
And the circumstances of 1945 is completely different from 2022.
Fine. But then,
and that is why people are campaigning at the UN Security Council that give Africa, in the circumstances of what has happened in 2022 and the last 20 years, give Africa a role at the Security Council with a permanent seat. What? So you can make that argument, but to come and say they didn't know what they were doing.
I'm not saying, I said the short-sightedness.
That's very dangerous.
It's not dangerous.
You were not there in 1945, and the circumstances of 45 determined that they do those things.
They were caught in the euphoria of victory. So
no, you can't say that as an analyst. As a student analyst, you can never say that. You can say that the circumstances of 1945 is very different from 2022. And therefore, if you look at it with posterity, you might think that the veto power given to members of the Security Council can be looked at again. You can say that. But to say that they were short-sighted,
of course.
Really? Is that how you analyze your history?
No, but the fact is that
it's determined by the circumstance of the day.
At the time when those things were born, right? At the time when those things were created, okay, a third of the world were outside the independent scope. A lot of countries were colonized, right?
Yeah, under colony.
So what prevented them? Because instantly, with the end of the Cold War and the Second World War, we saw the failure of this system from day one. We saw the Cold War emerging, and the Security Council couldn't halt the spread of the Cold War. So from the onset, we saw the lapses within the UN system. Why did the system persist for this so many years?
Who should change it? You?
That's what I'm telling you, that from the onset, they were caught in this euphoria of victory. So
but that's dangerous. You can't say, I'm not sure your professors will allow you to say that. You can't say that about any historical period.
But
you can't say that at the end of... So in Ghana, we had a 1916 constitution, Clifford Constitution. Yep. If you read it today, it looks like nothing. Yeah. But at the circumstance of 1916, it worked. We had a 1925 constitution. We had a 1946 constitution. We had a 1950 constitution. Now we have a 1992 constitution that holds some provisions that were not in 25. Because the circumstance, we can't sit here and say that, 1925, they put up a useless constitution.
I'm not saying they put up...
And then they were excited by the euphoria of victory.
Nobody were excited.
No, you can't say that as an analyst.
So what eliminated?
The circumstances were different.
If they were not excited by the euphoria of victory, what prevented them from giving the vanquished nations some spot on the table?
Who were the vanquished nations?
Japan, Germany.
If you fought a war, and won the war,
okay.
Yes, and at the time you were not even sure whether the vanquished nations would relaunch the war, because the Second World War was a relaunching of the First World War. So if you finish the Second World War and you're not even sure whether they will relaunch, you are going to give the vanquished power.
But then
I think we have to end the conversation here, Bello. You have to go and look at your history again. If you win a war, so Nanumba and Sisala fight a war, and Adom-Otchere, and they fight a war in 1416, and Adom-Otchere is vanquished, and they are creating a buffer zone by creating a certain security. You say they should add Adom-Otchere. That's what you are saying, really?
But then why
they should add the Germans, the Nazis that they are defeated in the war?
Why did they admit West Germany? Germany was divided into two.
Yeah, because the West were with the Allies.
But the West was part of United Nazi Germany.
Why did they admit Germany, West Germany to the UN?
Why did the Western world
admit West Germany to the UN?
Admitted West Germany to its fold.
To the UN, yes.
Not just to the UN, but even the Eastern Germans were in the UN. What I'm saying is that if they were supposed to treat them as vanquished, so they are threat.
Because the West Germans constituted the opposition to Hitler in Munich. Yes.
What I'm saying is that
that's what you don't understand. The West Germans constituted the opposition to Hitler at home. There was an opposition to Hitler at home. And that's how West Germany grew up. And that's how Hitler was thrown out of Munich.
But the entirety of Germany itself supported Hitler in assassination. Hitler didn't come to power through a coup.
No, that's a different conversation. I'm saying that at the time the war was being fought, if you read Hitler's own account, Mein Kampf, he had opposition particularly in West Germany.
Mein Kampf was written after the First World War, when Hitler was now developing his political career.
Yes, at that time he
But
recognized that the Germans
at the
thought
height
that.
of the Nazi victory, there was this Rufus in Germany.
So
and
your
every-
question is what? At the end of the victory,
what
why
I'm
did they
saying is
admit
that if, per your assertion, that,
that the
because
vanquished cannot be part of the Security Council?
cannot be part of the Security Council,
With a veto, yes.
then they shouldn't be part of any decision in the first place.
What does that mean?
So long as they have a say on the table. I'm saying with the benefit of the hindsight,
Yes.
we've seen the short-sightedness of that decision to keep world security and that's of some few nations and leave many out
If
of
you
it.
take a decision and push it back 40 years later, you always see something wrong. Because human beings develop.
But the first crack,
Yes. So you won't see it in 45, but you can see it in 22.
But we didn't see the crack.
So
in
when you
20
see it in 22, you change
But
it.
we didn't see the crack in 22.
Which crack?
The crack.
Yeah, whenever you see it, 22 is an example. You can see it in 1980.
No, we saw it earlier.
Who is we?
The world saw the crack earlier. Cold War emerged barely a decade after the World War II, right?
But why is Cold War anti-Security Council? Why is that?
The fact is that what prompted the Cold War? The ideological divide. What was prompting the ideological divide? The interests of the nations.
Yes.
So that should have prompted the world leaders at that time to quickly reform if they really wanted to take away that
You have
hegemony.
not understood power properly.
I understood
You
power.
think power is morality? It's not.
No, I'm not saying it's morality. What I'm saying is that but what I'm saying is that the US
Let's
argument
get back
today.
to our viewers.
The US argument
But we
today
have to discuss power. You have to understand power in political science is not morality.
is
It's power.
It's zero-sum game.
Yes, you have to understand that.
But then
and the expressions of power is the same with almost every powerful person.
That's what I'm saying.
This is your morality question.
No, it's not a morality
It doesn't
question.
work.
though. You want us to accept that Russia is wrong.
Let's see what people are saying. No, I'm not saying. Yeah, Russia is definitely wrong.
Russia-
Same as any other person.
Russia
could
is
be
definitely wrong.
So let's focus
But the
on that.
country to hold it
but
to
you
account-
think that Russia is wrong
So
because
but
America is also
US is
wrong.
not in position to hold Russia to account. It has blood. It should account. It should account for itself.
And then what happens after that?
If it can't account, she keep quiet. Let somebody like China come to talk. They don't have blood in their hands.
I'm sure you don't understand the power dynamics yet. And Bello is a strong brain. But when he understands power and economics, he will not be able to speak like that. Later on, Vladimir Putin will explain to you that power and economics mean a lot. That's why it took him a while to do what he wanted to do forever, because you need to align power and economics.
Sure.
Very important. Without that, you don't have an argument.